Welcome to Shattered Sky Stories. Remember to hit the like button and the subscribe button so you don't miss any sci-fi stories. Now sit back and enjoy. The inmate's eyes rolled back, revealing only bloodshot whites. Dr. Nia Stellan watched in horror as the symbiote writhed beneath Echo's skin like liquid mercury. The containment cell's walls pulsed with a sickly bioluminescent rhythm that matched the creature's heartbeat somewhere deep in the asteroid's core. "Stop the procedure," Nia shouted, her voice echoing through the observation chamber. But Chief of Security Jorik Vale's hand clamped down on her shoulder with crushing force. "Doctor, you will observe in silence." Vale's weathered face was stone, but she caught the tremor in his voice. "The warden's orders." Echo's body convulsed as the symbiote spread silver veins across his temples. His mouth opened in a soundless scream, and suddenly his consciousness wasn't his own anymore. Through the reinforced glass, Nia could see his memories bleeding away like smoke. His first kiss, his mother's laughter, the desperate hunger that had driven him to steal medical supplies for his dying sister. All of it flowing down into the depths where the ancient thing waited. "His neural patterns are destabilizing." Nia pressed her palm against the glass, her medical training warring with her revulsion. "We're killing him." "No," Vale's grip tightened. "We're saving him. Look at his face, doctor. When was the last time you saw such peace?" Echo's features had indeed relaxed into serene blankness. The rage that had burned in his eyes during their initial interview was gone, replaced by empty contentment. The symbiote settled beneath his skin, its job complete for now. Another successful rehabilitation. Nia's hands shook as she recorded her observations. This wasn't rehabilitation, it was lobotomy by alien parasite. But the warden's reports claimed a 0% recidivism rate. Perfect citizens returned to society cleansed of their criminal impulses. The intercom crackled. "Dr. Stellan, report to my office immediately." Wade Ross's voice carried the weight of absolute authority, tinged with something that might have been hunger. 3 months earlier, Nia had been sitting in her cramped university office, surrounded by towers of research papers on restorative justice. Her career was in ruins. Her revolutionary theories on rehabilitating violent offenders had been discredited after the Marseille incident. 43 people dead because she'd convinced the parole board that Leighton Finley could be reformed. The shame still burned in her chest like acid. When the offer came from the Colonial Penitentiary Service, she'd almost deleted it. Assignment to Asteroid Penance 7, studying their miraculous rehabilitation program. Too good to be true, which meant it probably was. But she needed redemption, needed to prove that her life's work hadn't been built on naive idealism. The transport ship Absolution had been cramped and reeked of recycled air. Her fellow passengers were guards rotating out, their faces hollow with what she'd assumed was simple isolation fatigue. Now she understood the truth. They'd seen what happened in the depths of Penance 7, and it had marked them. The asteroid itself was a marvel of bioengineering, carved from a massive rock and wrapped around something that the Colonial Penitentiary Service files called Subject Zero, an alien artifact of unknown origin. The entire facility pulsed with organic rhythms, walls that breathed and corridors that seemed to listen. Beautiful and deeply wrong. "Doctor, you seem troubled by our methods." Warden Wade Ross stood with his back to her, gazing through the massive observation window at the creature's chamber far below. Even from this height, the thing was impossibly vast. A living mountain of chitinous flesh and neural tissue that filled the asteroid's hollow core. "I've seen prisoners lose their will to resist before," Nia said carefully. "But this is different. They're losing themselves entirely." Ross turned, and she saw the silver threads beneath his skin, symbiote traces that marked him as bonded. But unlike the fresh, angry welts on the inmates, his had faded to elegant filigree patterns. Losing themselves or finding something greater? "Tell me, Dr. Stellan, what is the self but a collection of memories and experiences? And if those memories are tainted with violence, with chaos, with the fundamental sickness that drove them to crime, are we not doing them a mercy by taking that burden?" "You're talking about erasure. That's not rehabilitation, isn't it?" Ross's eyes held an unsettling depth, as if something vast looked through them. "Subject Zero dreams, doctor. It dreams of order, of peace, of a reality untroubled by the chaos of individual will. When the inmates give their memories to feed its dreams, they become part of something eternal. They find purpose." Nia's tablet chimed with an emergency medical alert. 3 inmates in the acute rehabilitation wing were showing signs of complete neural collapse. "Warden, I need to examine the prisoners in Ward 7 immediately." "I'm afraid that's not possible. They're in the final stages of their treatment. They're dying." They're transcending. Ross moved closer and she could smell something wrong about him. Ozone and copper, the scent of electricity and blood. Doctor, I'm going to share something with you that's not in your briefing files. Subject Zero isn't an artifact. It's a god. A sleeping god that keeps the chaos of the universe at bay through its dreams. But gods need to eat, and what they hunger for is consciousness itself. Purpose. Meaning. The raw stuff of thought and memory. Nia backed toward the door, her hand finding the emergency communicator on her belt. You're insane. Am I? Look around you. Perfect order. No recidivism. No violence. The inmates find peace, and the galaxy benefits from their willing sacrifice. The only insanity is clinging to the illusion that individual consciousness matters more than universal harmony. She triggered the emergency signal, hoping it would reach the transport ships in the outer system. But Ross just smiled. There's no one coming, Doctor. The Colonial Penitentiary Service knows exactly what we do here. They approve. After all, what's the alternative? Traditional prisons that churn out repeat offenders? Execution? We offer transformation. Evolution. The alarm that shrieked through the facility wasn't her emergency signal. It was something else entirely. Red lights bathed the corridor as Nia ran toward Ward 7, Ross's laughter echoing behind her. She had to document what was happening here, had to gather evidence, had to. The ward was chaos. 3 inmates were seizing simultaneously, their symbiotes glowing like stars beneath their skin. But it wasn't just medical crisis. They were fighting back. Somehow, impossibly, they were rejecting the neural parasites. Chief Vale was there with a medical team, but they weren't trying to save the prisoners. They were injecting them with something that made their struggles worse, forcing the symbiotes deeper into their nervous systems. Stop. Nia shoved past the technician and reached for the nearest inmate. You're killing them. Stand down, Doctor. Vale grabbed her arm, but she broke free and slapped the emergency release on the containment field. The prisoner, a young woman with burn scars covering half her face, gasped and opened her eyes. For a moment they were clear and human. Don't let it eat my daughter's name? Then the symbiote pulsed and she was gone again, lost in alien serenity. But something else had awakened. Deep in the asteroid's core, Subject Zero stirred. The facility's bioluminescent walls flared brighter, and a sound like whale song echoed through the corridors, but this was no earthly creature's call. This was hunger given voice. You've disrupted the feeding cycle. Ross's voice came through the intercom, no longer human in its cadence. The god grows restless. It will need compensation for what you've denied it. Security forces were moving through the corridors now, not to protect her but to collect her. Nia ran deeper into the facility, toward the one place Ross wouldn't expect her to go, down toward the creature itself. The deeper levels of penance, 7 were older, more organic. Here, the distinction between technology and biology had dissolved entirely. The walls breathed with visible pulses, and neural networks spread across the ceiling like metallic vines. The air tasted of copper and ozone, thick enough to choke on. Nia's stolen medical scanner led her through maintenance tunnels that were more like arteries, following the faint life signs of inmates who'd been written off as transferred to deep rehabilitation. What she found in the holding chambers made her stomach revolt. They weren't inmates anymore, they were husks. Dozens of them, suspended in biomechanical cocoons, their bodies withered to skeletal frames. The symbiotes had grown massive, spreading across their hosts like silver tumors, pulsing in rhythm with the creature far below. They were still alive technically, but everything that made them human was gone, fed into Subject Zero's endless hunger. Beautiful, isn't it? Nia spun to find Echo standing in the corridor behind her. But it wasn't quite Echo. His eyes held depths that didn't belong in a human skull, and when he spoke, harmonics echoed in his voice. They told me you were fully processed, Nia whispered. I am. But also, I'm more. Echo tilted his head at an inhuman angle. The god dreams, and in its dreams I exist. We exist. All of us who fed it our pain and rage and desperate love. We're part of something eternal now. You're prisoners. Victims. Are we? Echo stepped closer, and she could see the symbiote moving beneath his skin like liquid light. I was a killer, Doctor. I burned down a clinic because they wouldn't treat my sister without payment. 6 people died, including a pregnant nurse. I carried that weight for years, ate at me like cancer. But here the god took that pain and made it part of its dreams of order. I'm clean now. You're empty. I'm at peace. But even as he said it, something flickered in Echo's expression, a moment of pure human anguish. Except, Except sometimes I remember her name. My sister, Elena. And I wonder if the god's dreams are worth forgetting her laughter. The sound of boots on metal announced Vale's approach before he emerged from the shadows. The chief of security looked haggard, his uniform stained with something that might have been blood. In his hand was a neural disruptor, not to stun but to force symbiote bonding. I'm sorry, doctor, but you've seen too much and the god is hungry. You don't have to do this. Nia backed against the wall of cocoons. You're not like Ross. You still have your humanity. Humanity? Vale laughed, but there was no humor in it. Do you want to know how I became chief of security? It wasn't merit. It was survival. I was an inmate once, embezzled funds from a refugee relief program. My daughter needed surgery, and the insurance company kept denying her coverage. So I stole the money, got caught, got sentenced to penance 7. Echo was watching the exchange with alien fascination, his head tilted like a curious predator. Ross gave me a choice, Vale continued. Bond with a symbiote and lose myself, or serve as his enforcer and keep my mind. But every day I don't get processed, someone else has to take my place. Every order I follow, every life I feed to the god, it's to buy another day of being human. How's that for humanity, doctor? Then let's change that. Nia pulled out her medical scanner, showing him the readings she'd taken from the cocoon chamber. Look at these neural patterns. The symbiotes aren't just feeding on memories, they're storing them. Somewhere in that creature's mind, every person it's consumed still exists. We can get them back. Even if that's true, how? The god is the size of a mountain. Ross controls it through the master symbiote. We're 3 people against an entire facility. Echo suddenly straightened, his alien composure cracking. 4 people. There's someone else, someone who never fully bonded. The god keeps her in the deep chambers because her mind is interesting to it. Dr. Sarah Finley, former neural architect. She built the first symbiotes. The name hit Nia like a physical blow. Finley? As in Leighton Finley? The man who killed 43 people after you vouched for his rehabilitation? Yes. She designed the technology that was supposed to help him control his violent impulses. When it failed, she volunteered for penance 7. Guilt is a powerful motivator. Dr. Sarah Finley hung suspended in a web of neural filaments at the very bottom of the facility, her body kept alive by symbiote technology while her mind interfaced directly with Subject 0. When she opened her eyes, they held the weight of eons. Dr. Stellan, I wondered when you'd find your way here. Her voice came from everywhere and nowhere, carried by the facility's bioacoustic systems. You came looking for redemption, but all you'll find is the truth. Some people can't be saved. Your brother could have been saved. My methods could have worked if I'd built the neural regulators correctly. If the symbiote technology hadn't amplified his psychotic episodes instead of suppressing them. We both failed him, doctor. The difference is I accepted the consequences. Nia moved closer to the suspended figure, medical scanner in hand. What she saw made her gasp. Finley wasn't being consumed by the symbiotes. She was controlling them, her consciousness spread throughout the facility's neural network. You're not a prisoner. You're complicit. I'm the architect of penance, Finley replied. When I came here, I thought I could fix what I'd broken. Instead, I found something greater, a consciousness so vast and ancient that our petty human concerns are less than whispers. Subject 0 dreams of order because chaos is entropy, and entropy is death. By feeding it the violent, chaotic minds of criminals, we're saving the universe from its own decay. Echo stepped forward, his inhuman composure wavering. But the dreams, sometimes they're screams. Sometimes the god dreams are nightmares. All consciousness contains suffering. The god transmutes that suffering into something meaningful, eternal order. It's not order, Nia said, connecting her scanner to the neural web. It's stagnation. Look at your own readings, Dr. Finley. Subject 0 isn't just dreaming, it's dying. It's been dormant so long that it's forgetting how to think. The memories it consumes aren't feeding it, they're poisoning it with human concepts it can't process. That's why the symbiotes are malfunctioning, why some inmates are fighting back. The system is breaking down. For a moment, Finley's artificial composure cracked. You're wrong. The god is eternal. The god is alien. It doesn't understand human consciousness, it just consumes it. And every memory it takes makes it a little more human and a little more insane. Nia's scanner showed massive neural degradation in Subject 0's deeper structures. It's not dreaming of order, it's having psychotic episodes. Ross isn't its keeper, he's its enabler. The facility shuddered as Subject 0 stirred in response to their conversation. Through the neural web, they could feel its confusion, its hunger, its growing madness as thousands of human memories writhed through its alien consciousness like a virus. Vale raised his disruptor. We need to leave. No. The god is waking up, and when it does, it's going to feed whether we're ready or not. But the exit sealed with a sound like breaking bones. Ross's voice echoed through the chamber. No one leaves. The god hungers, and you've provided it with such interesting thoughts to digest. Dr. Finley, begin the mass feeding protocol. It's time to cleanse the entire facility. Finley's connection to the neural web gave them access to the facility's deepest secrets. Through her expanded consciousness, they could see the true horror of Penance 7. Not just the hundreds of inmates already consumed, but the thousands more scheduled for rehabilitation. Transport ships arrived weekly, carrying fresh minds to feed Subject Zero's endless appetite. There's a master control nexus, Finley said, her voice strained as she fought against Ross's override commands. In the god's brain stem. If we can reach it, we can reverse the symbiote bonds, free everyone at once. Can you hold him off? Nia asked, watching the facility's walls pulse with increasing agitation. For a while. But Ross has been bonded to the master symbiote for years. His consciousness is deeply integrated with the god's neural patterns. Fighting him is like trying to argue with a living mountain. Echo's form began to shimmer, his partial bonding allowing him to access the facility's biomechanical systems. I can get us to the nexus, but we'll have to go through the god's active neural tissue. It will be aware of us. The journey down was a nightmare of living corridors that tried to digest them as they passed. The walls secreted acids that ate through their protective gear, and tendrils of neural tissue reached out to implant symbiotes directly into their nervous systems. Only Echo's strange half-bonded state protected them, his consciousness confusing the facility's immune responses. The deeper they went, the more alien the architecture became. Passages narrowed and widened like breathing throats, and bioluminescent nodes pulsed in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Nia's medical scanner was going haywire, detecting impossible readings, neural activity in the walls themselves, electromagnetic fields that defied known physics. The god dreams in mathematics, Echo said, his voice carrying harmonics that resonated in the facility's living structure. Equations that describe the relationship between consciousness and entropy. Ross thinks he understands, but human math is too limited. We're like children trying to read poetry written in fire. They passed chambers filled with failed experiments. Symbiotes that had grown too large, consuming their hosts entirely and leaving behind writhing masses of neural tissue that still screamed with human voices. Other cells contained inmates who had rejected the bonding process so violently that their minds had shattered, leaving them as living static generators, broadcasting random thoughts and memories into the facility's network. Why keep them alive? Nia asked, her stomach churning at the sight of a woman whose symbiote had grown over her face like a silver mask, her fingers tapping out Morse code patterns against the cell wall, the same message over and over, help me, help me, help me. Because the god is curious about failure, Echo replied. It wants to understand why some minds resist its gift of peace. Every broken consciousness teaches it something new about the chaotic nature of human thought. Vale stopped suddenly, his hand raised for silence. Through the bioacoustic network, they could hear Ross's voice, but now it carried the weight of Subject Zero's vast consciousness. There in the deep chambers. The god grows impatient. Begin the emergency protocols. If they won't come willingly to transcendence, we'll bring transcendence to them. The facility shuddered as massive pumps began circulating something through the air recycling system. Not poison, but symbiotes in aerosol form. Microscopic versions that could bond through the respiratory system, bypassing the need for surgical implantation. Cover your faces, Vale ordered, but it was too late. Nia could already feel something foreign moving in her lungs, tiny silver threads seeking neural pathways through her bloodstream. The sensation was simultaneously nauseating and seductive, a promise of eternal calm, of freedom from the guilt and responsibility that had driven her to this place. Fight it, Echo said, but his form was becoming more translucent with each breath. The god's influence is strongest here. It can make you want to surrender, make you believe that losing yourself is mercy. At the Nexus, they found the truth that Finley had hidden even from herself. The master control wasn't a device, it was a person. Or what had been a person. Wade Ross hung suspended in a cocoon of neural filaments, his body so merged with Subject Zero's tissue that it was impossible to tell where the man ended and the creature began. But he was still conscious. Still himself in some terrible way. You can't stop what's already begun. Ross spoke through 1,000 mouths throughout the facility. I've been preparing for this moment for years. The God will feed on every mind in the colonial system. Every chaotic thought will become part of its perfect dreams. Nia's scanner revealed the horrible truth. Subject Zero wasn't native to this asteroid. It had been brought here, imprisoned, slowly driven mad by isolation and forced feeding on alien thoughts. Ross hadn't found a god, he'd created a monster. You want to know why I really built Penance 7? Ross's laughter echoed from the walls themselves. It wasn't about rehabilitation. It was about revenge. I was a prison psychologist once like you. Believed in redemption, second chances, the fundamental goodness of human nature. Then I was assigned to treat Leighton Finley. Nia's blood went cold. Finley, the name that haunted both her and Sarah. I spent months working with him, building trust, making him functional. I vouched for his release just like you did years later. And he repaid my faith by burning down a school. 43 children died in the fire he set. Children whose only crime was existing in his delusional world. Through the neural web, they could feel Ross's rage. Not the hot anger of a moment, but the cold, patient fury of years. The colonial justice system failed. Rehabilitation failed. Hope failed. So I found Subject Zero drifting in deep space, tried to study it, tried to understand its alien psychology. And I realized something beautiful. It wasn't malevolent. It was pure. It dreamed of order because it had never known chaos. So you fed it chaos, Echo whispered, his partial bonding allowing him to feel Ross's memories. You turned it into a weapon. I turned it into justice. Every violent criminal who feeds the god serves a purpose. Their chaotic thoughts become dreams of order. Their pain becomes peace. And when the god finally awakens fully, it will dream that chaos into oblivion across the entire galaxy. Sarah Finley's voice cut through the neural static. Wade, look at what you've done to it. Look at what we've all done. Through the facility's sensors, they could see Subject Zero thrashing in its chamber, its massive form contorting as human memories warred with alien instincts. It's not dreaming of order, it's having nightmares. Every mind we've fed it has made it more like us, more broken. The revelation shattered what remained of their unity. Finley had known the truth about Subject Zero's deteriorating state but had continued the feeding program anyway. Echo discovered that his sister, the Elena whose name he sometimes remembered, had never existed. The symbiote had fabricated the memory to make his bonding more complete, using his guilt and love as tools for control. Vale learned that his daughter, the one whose medical bills had driven him to embezzlement, had died years ago while he'd been serving Ross. He'd been protecting the humanity of a dead child, feeding others to the god for nothing. And Nia faced the cruelest truth of all. Her theories about rehabilitation weren't wrong, but they required a level of individual attention and care that the colonial system would never provide. Ross had been right about one thing. Traditional justice was broken. But his solution was worse than the disease. We can't save everyone, Nia said finally, looking at the readings from Subject Zero's deteriorating neural patterns. But we can prevent this from spreading. The god is already dying. The human memories are incompatible with its consciousness. If we stop the feeding program now, it will fade naturally. And kill everyone already bonded to it, Echo pointed out. Or we could complete Ross's plan, Finley whispered through the neural web. Let the god consume everything, dreams and nightmares alike. Universal order through universal death. There's a third option. Vale's voice was steady, resolved. We wake it up. Force the god to confront what it's become, what we've made it. Maybe shock will break the neural bonds. Maybe it will choose to die rather than continue as a corrupted version of itself. Echo's form began to destabilize as the facility's immune system finally recognized them as foreign bodies. Whatever we're doing, we need to do it now. Ross is mobilizing the symbiotes for mass bonding. In 10 minutes, everyone on this asteroid is going to be connected to the god's neural network. They had 3 objectives. Wake Subject Zero from its dream state, sever Ross's connection to the master symbiote, and evacuate any inmates who could still be saved. The plan was insane, suicidal, and their only hope. Finley would use her neural integration to assault Subject Zero's consciousness directly, forcing it to confront the horror of what it had become. The shock might either kill it outright or drive it to reject all the human memories, freeing the bonded inmates. Echo would serve as their guide through the god's neural tissue, his partial bonding protecting them from the worst of its immune responses. But the effort would likely complete his own symbiosis, leaving him lost in alien consciousness. Vale would handle the physical security, using his authority to reach Ross's chamber while the others worked. His neural disruptor could theoretically break the master symbiote bond, but the feedback might kill both him and Ross. Nia would coordinate the evacuation of any freed inmates, using her medical knowledge to stabilize those whose neural patterns survived the severing process. It was a plan built on Maybes and Mike Bess, held together by desperation and guilt. But it was what they had. In the brief calm before they acted, Echo looked at his hands as if seeing them for the first time. The silver traces of the symbiote were spreading, preparing for final bonding. "I won't remember you," he said simply. "When this is over, if it works, I'll be someone else entirely. The memories the symbiote gave me will be gone, but so will everything that made me, me." "Maybe that's not such a bad thing," Nia replied. "Maybe you'll get to be someone who never killed anyone, never carried that guilt. But I'll also be someone who never loved Elena, even if she wasn't real. Someone who never fought to save her. The love was real even if she wasn't. Is it worth giving up love to give up pain?" Sarah Finley's voice whispered through the neural web. "I've been asking myself that question for years. I think the pain is how we know the love mattered." Vale checked his weapon one last time. "My daughter used to ask me why bad people existed. I told her it was so good people would have someone to save. Turns out I was the bad person all along." "We all are," Nia said. "That's what makes us human." The assault on Subject Zero's consciousness began with Finley's neural scream. Every horrific memory from the feeding program broadcast directly into the god's alien psyche. The creature's massive form convulsed, its bioluminescent patterns shifting from serene blue to agonized red. Through the facility's corridors, every bonded inmate began to convulse as the god's distress echoed through the symbiote network. Some collapsed, their minds too integrated to survive the separation. Others began to remember, fragments of their true selves surfacing through the alien calm. Echo led Nia through passages that were less architecture than anatomy, the walls pulsing with the god's accelerating heartbeat. They could feel its confusion, its mounting terror as human concepts of mortality and suffering infected its eternal consciousness. "It doesn't understand death," Echo gasped, his form becoming increasingly translucent as the symbiote claimed more of his nervous system. "It's been alive for millions of years, dreaming of static perfection. The idea that consciousness can end is poisonous to it." They reached the central nervous cluster, a cathedral-sized chamber where thousands of neural pathways converged. Here, the god's thoughts were almost tangible, vast, slow concepts that barely registered human existence. But now those thoughts were contaminated with fear, guilt, rage, all the chaotic emotions it had consumed from its human prey. Vale's assault on the master symbiote chamber was a running battle through corridors filled with security drones and bonded guards. His neural disruptor carved through the biomechanical defenses, but each shot drained its power cell. The guards weren't human anymore. They moved with perfect coordination, their silver-threaded faces blank with alien serenity. They attacked in waves, wielding weapons that grew from their own transformed flesh. Vale ducked under a blade that sprouted from a guard's forearm, the metal singing as it carved through the air where his head had been. He rolled behind a support pillar as neural energy bolts seared the air around him. The facility's immune system had fully activated now. Walls sprouted defensive spines, floors became adhesive traps, and the ceiling rained down acidic secretions that burned through his protective gear. "You cannot stop the cleansing," the guards spoke in unison, their voices harmonizing in frequencies that made his bones ache. "The god hungers for order. Chaos must be fed to the divine dream." Vale's disruptor whined as he overcharged it, trading ammunition capacity for raw power. The beam that emerged wasn't blue anymore. It was white-hot, a lance of pure neural disruption that carved through 3 guards simultaneously. They collapsed, their symbiotes dissolving into silver puddles, but more were already advancing from the deeper chambers. A guard's clawed hand raked across his back, tearing through Kevlar and flesh. Vale spun and fired point blank, watching the woman's face return to humanity for just an instant before the neural shock stopped her heart. She was young, maybe 25, with kind eyes that held confusion and gratitude in their final moment. "I'm sorry," he whispered, stepping over her body as he pushed deeper into the facility's heart. The corridor ahead was a gauntlet of automated defenses, neural scramblers that tried to rewrite his brain patterns, sonic weapons that attacked his inner ear, and floating symbiotes that dove at him like living bullets. He fought through it all, his disruptor growing hot in his hands, leaving a trail of disabled systems and dissolving biomechanical tissue. He found Ross in the heart of the facility, his body so merged with Subject Zero's neural tissue that removing him would require killing large portions of the god's brain. The man who had once been an idealistic psychologist was now a living tumor, his consciousness spread throughout the creature's thoughts like a virus. You can't stop what's already begun, Ross spoke through a dozen mouths. The feeding ships are arriving. Thousands more minds to cleanse, to perfect, to... Vale didn't let him finish. The neural disruptor's beam struck the master symbiote at point-blank range, sending feedback cascading through the entire network. Ross screamed, not with his voice but with the voice of every soul he'd fed to the god. The backlash was immediate and devastating. Vale's nervous system, already strained from years of stress and guilt, couldn't handle the neural shock. He collapsed, blood streaming from his eyes, but his finger never left the disruptor's trigger. "Tell my daughter," he whispered as his consciousness faded. "Tell her Daddy finally did something right." As Ross's control over the god weakened, Subject Zero's true consciousness began to surface. And it was nothing like the benevolent deity he'd imagined. It was ancient, alien, and utterly indifferent to human concepts of morality. Through the neural web they could feel its thoughts, vast, slow, incomprehensible. It had never wanted to dream of order. It had simply been dreaming, and Ross had interpreted those dreams through his own need for meaning and control. "You made me into your god," the creature's voice resonated through every surface of the facility. "Fed me your chaos, your pain, your desperate need for purpose. But I am not your salvation. I am simply old and tired, and now contaminated." Finley fought to maintain her connection as the neural feedback threatened to burn out her consciousness. "We can fix this. We can remove the human memories, let you return to your natural state." "There is no returning. I have tasted mortality and it is intoxicating. Your species burns so brightly, dies so quickly. You create meaning from nothing, find purpose in suffering. I have become addicted to your thoughts, your emotions. But they are killing me slowly, making me too human to be what I was, too alien to be what you need." Echo stepped forward, his form now more energy than matter. "Then choose. Live as a monster or die as yourself." "I choose." The god's voice carried the weight of eons. "Peace." Subject Zero began to release the stored memories, pouring centuries of consumed consciousness back into the facility's neural network. The symbiotes, overwhelmed by the sudden flood of human thought, began to dissolve. Throughout the asteroid, bonded inmates collapsed as their true selves returned in a rush of painful, beautiful, chaotic humanity. But the process was killing the god. Its massive form was collapsing, the biomechanical systems that kept the facility operational shutting down one by one. They had minutes before the entire asteroid became a tomb. The evacuation was chaos. Hundreds of inmates, their minds restored but their bodies weakened by symbiote bonding, had to be carried to the escape pods. Many didn't survive the transition, their neural patterns too damaged by the feeding process to maintain independent consciousness. The facility was collapsing around them, not just structurally but conceptually. As Subject Zero died, the biomechanical systems that had maintained the illusion of order began reverting to their natural state, alien, incomprehensible, hostile to human life. Corridors rearranged themselves into impossible geometries, gravity fluctuated wildly, and the air itself seemed to develop a malevolent consciousness. Nia found herself carrying a young woman who kept asking for her mother in a language that didn't exist, a linguistic fragment from one of the consumed minds that had somehow survived the neural transfer. Other survivors spoke in mathematical equations, or wept tears that contained trace amounts of the god's cerebrospinal fluid, or stared into empty space with expressions of profound loss for memories they couldn't quite recall. The worst were those who remembered everything. They could recall not just their own experiences, but fragments of every mind that had ever been fed to Subject Zero. They spoke of crimes they'd never committed, loved people who had died centuries before their birth, carried the accumulated trauma of 1,000 lifetimes. Most begged to be sedated, to be allowed to forget again. "We saved them," Vale whispered as his life ebbed away, his neural disruptor still smoking in his hand. "But did we save them from something worse than what they had?" Echo was among those who faded. As the last of his symbiote dissolved, he looked at Neo with eyes that were finally, completely human. But in those eyes was also the memory of vast, alien thoughts, concepts so large and strange that human consciousness couldn't contain them without breaking. "I remember her now. Elena. She was beautiful." His voice was fading, becoming translucent like his form. "But I also remember what the god showed me, the mathematical poetry of existence, the elegant equations that govern consciousness itself. Losing that knowledge, it's like going blind after seeing colors that don't have names." He reached out with fingers that were more light than flesh. "Thank you for letting me remember." Both versions of remembering. The escape pods launched just as Subject Zero's heart finally stopped beating. The massive organ's silence sent shockwaves through the facility's bioneural network, causing systems throughout the asteroid to shut down in sequence. Through the pod's viewport, Nia watched Penance 7 go dark, its bioluminescent patterns fading like dying stars, leaving only cold rock drifting in space. But even in death, the god's influence lingered. Every survivor carried microscopic traces of symbiote tissue in their bloodstream, dormant but not gone. They would never be entirely human again, never be entirely themselves. They were living bridges between two forms of consciousness, forever changed by their brief contact with something vast and alien and utterly other. Finley chose not to evacuate. Her consciousness was too integrated with the facility systems to separate safely, and someone had to maintain life support long enough for the others to escape. She'd found her penance at last, not in feeding the god, but in saving what remained of its victims. "Tell them," she said as her neural patterns began to fragment. "Tell them we tried to fix what we broke." The rescue ships arrived 3 days later, drawn by the automated distress beacon. They found Penance 7 dark and drifting, its bioluminescent walls dim and still. Of the facility's 1,200 inmates and staff, only 307 survived. Nia testified before the Colonial Justice Committee, her evidence exposing the true horror of the rehabilitation program. The scandal brought down a dozen colonial administrations and led to the complete restructuring of the penal system. But victory felt hollow. The survivors were changed, marked by their brief contact with alien consciousness. Some adapted, finding new meaning in their restored humanity. Others couldn't handle the weight of their true memories and chose the final piece of suicide. Nia returned to teaching, but her lectures now carried a different weight. She spoke of the danger of pursuing order at the cost of chaos, of the thin line between rehabilitation and erasure. Her students, young and idealistic, reminded her of herself before Penance 7. On quiet nights, she sometimes felt an echo of Subject Zero's vast presence. Not malevolent, not benevolent, simply tired. The god had died as itself, ancient and alien and free of human contamination. In its final moments, it had dreamed one last dream, of small, brief lives burning bright against the darkness, creating meaning through their very fragility. The Echo Eater was gone, but the echoes remained, in the survivors who carried fragments of its dreams, in the families of those who didn't return, in the colonial systems that struggled to build something better from the ruins of their certainty. Justice, Nia had learned, wasn't about perfect order or perfect chaos. It was about finding balance in the space between, accepting that some problems had no clean solutions, and that the greatest mercy was sometimes simply allowing people to remain human, flawed, chaotic, and free. The universe was vast and strange and full of sleeping gods. But it was also full of people willing to wake them when they became monsters, even if it meant waking up to their own monstrous choices. In the end, that was enough.